Hello and welcome to the Irish Fire Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Houghton. I'm an entrepreneur, investor, and financial independence enthusiast, sharing my financial freedom journey. Stay tuned and welcome aboard. I hope you are doing well. Before cracking on to today's episode, I thought I would give a little bit of an update. Things are really looking up in our household. I finished an additional work project that I'd taken on for 6 months at the end of August, and it's been refreshing cutting back at work. And yes, this has had an impact on our monthly savings rate and how much we are saving, but when looking at it from a cost-benefit analysis, there is no doubt that it was the right decision to make. I've finally stopped working evenings after pretty much on and off over the last year or two, working overtime and working additional hours in the evening. And interestingly, it's taken me a while to kind of decompress from that. The first couple of weeks of finishing off the project, ironically, I found myself still working in the evenings almost out of habit. And look, some nights I still might do it, but only because I want to, not because I have to. And that notion is extremely important. So I'm certainly enjoying work a lot more, having less on my plate. And work-life balance obviously is extremely important. Hockey's also started up again for this season, so I've been back on the hockey pitch, which has been great. And getting lots of exercise in and meeting lots of kids and parents, which has been wonderful as well. And actually being able to appreciate the wonderful things that have been set up from years gone past, from myself setting up hockey clubs to various other organizations, and really just being able to enjoy those, giving as much time as I want to give, but also reflecting and certainly enjoying a lot more time freedom these days, which has been great. And I guess what I hope is my last kind of 15 to 16 months of pursuing fire, and we're almost there. We are really, really close. We're now over 630,000 euros on our fire portfolio, chasing a total of 750. Our big magic FI number. So we're certainly getting there, but I'm certainly happy to enjoy the journey and enjoy this last 15 or 16 months or so. On to today's episode then, and this is something which I've been reflecting on a little bit recently, and the title of the episode is called What Would Ramit Say? And for those who don't know who Ramit is, he wrote the book I Will Teach You to Be Rich, and he also has a fairly popular Netflix show, so definitely check that out. And I actually started listening to quite a lot of his content recently, particularly his interviews with various fire people, and a couple of whom I have been critical of at points in the podcast history. So for example, he did interview the mad Fientist, Brandon, on his spending and the fact that Brandon still hasn't really started withdrawing from his fire portfolio, even though he's been retired now for 7 years or so. But the better interview, and the really one that I was absolutely in hysterics over, was the interview that he had with Carl and Mindy, aka 1500 Days, which I think someone like Carl and Mindy needed, because they had effectively had an initial FI number of 1.1 million or 1.2 million US dollars, and their portfolio is now worth like 4.4 million or something ridiculous, and they still haven't touched it. And so really they needed somebody like Ramit to come and sort things out, and it was so good. I would definitely share the link to this interview in the show notes, but the very early part where she's talking about her trip to Germany and the cost, it is just so good. And what Ramit really drives home is excellent. And I kind of reflected on all of this after listening to the interview, and obviously a little bit of a follow-up to the last episode I released called The Simple Life, which is all about the fact that our family has built this life not around spending money, but around appreciating the small things and each other's company. And certainly, if you follow Mr. Money Mustache and a lot of the stuff that he writes about, he does write about the fact that even a lifestyle of, say, 24,000 euros a year spending, by international standards, is still a phenomenal lifestyle. There's so many things being in the developed world that we should be appreciating. I've certainly taken a lot of that on board, and it has helped with my general happiness and moods, just to feel like I can appreciate the small things, which does go such a long way. For Ramit, I often wonder what he would say to me, though, and if we were to sit down and have a conversation, and I guess I sit down and talk about my last couple of years of pursuing fire and looking to retire within 10 years of our start date, what would he say? Would he say something like, well, hang on, Michael, what's the rush? And I kind of reflect on it further and think, would he say something like, well, if you don't like work, why don't you find work that you love? Furthermore, I think he would challenge some of our spending in the sense of there's certainly bucket list items that we have been putting off for a long while. So one of those things was that we've recently decided that when we will hit FI, we will plan a big trip to New Zealand, which is well overdue for us to make. And look, obviously a trip like that, you need to get everything right, including the age of your children, knowing where to stay and who you can stay with. And for us, it's not quite there yet. We're still another year or so from being able to make that trip, but it's certainly going to be one of the things that we're going to do, which happens to coincide with us hitting financial independence. But in the meantime, there's still some other trips that we wouldn't mind being able to take. And one of those trips was actually booking a trip to Spain. We haven't been overseas for a number of years outside of visiting my sister in London. And so we thought it might be nice to actually be able to go and book one of those nice overseas trips that so many of us get to take each year. Because the reflection I had was that Ramit would say something like, why don't you take that trip you want to take? Why are you delaying this gratification? When you start to dig deep on Ramit's advice, there's a lot of good stuff there, obviously. And for somebody like me that maybe is a little bit frugal, there's certainly a push. And look, certainly spending money on certain things isn't going to push the needle too much. However, there's a couple of things that Ramit fails to really fully understand from a FIRE point of view. He's very critical of the FIRE movement in the sense that, you oversave and you don't draw down your capital. And I don't necessarily think that that's true. However, Ramit also fails to understand the fact that time freedom and work freedom is a huge thing to fight for and likely will be the best thing that your money can buy. And I don't see how when Ramit says throwing money at something that you love is always going to make it better. We need to be more objective with money. Just because we love something doesn't mean that more money will make it any better. Money is a trade-off on multiple fronts. Firstly, we need to decide if spending the money is worth the effort taken to earn it, an idea taken first from your money or your life. And secondly, we need to decide if there's an opportunity cost for that money. Could it be spent somewhere else, something different, or even an investment? So going back to that overseas trip that we booked recently, my mother-in-law had this dream of visiting Lanzarote, and we love the Canary Islands. So this was our focus. We looked at different flights and different package holidays. I went in with the idea that I didn't want to let money be the only factor in the decision. But in the end, as I started looking at the packages, they were going to cost anywhere from 5,000 to 8,000 euro. I started to ask myself other questions. Was this the best use of that money? What opportunity cost was I missing out on? I realized if I was willing to pay say 8,000 euros for a 1-week trip to Lanzarote, would that money be better used to help us cover a 3-week trip to New Zealand? Secondly, the higher costs seem to be associated with traveling in July and August, and I'm just not a big fan of traveling to Southern Europe during the peak season, particularly because it's obviously busy but also extremely hot. And in many cases, Ireland's best in those months when you have those long summer days and you're teeing off at 5 p.m. for a game of golf after a day's work and so on. In the end, we picked a resort that wasn't the cheapest, but came with 10 pools and all sorts of things that the kids would love. We did a good couple of hours worth of research and we made sure that we spent the time that we needed. I know something that Ramit says is that, oh no, just book the trip. Don't worry about over-engineering it. And it's like, well, hang on. It's nice to know that we've done our research. We booked a trip in April that cost us 536 euros per person with TUI. We got everything we wanted at a great price, focusing on value. I often wonder what Ramit would say to this. Would he call me cheap for spending my time finding a good deal? For me, it simply seems illogical to pay more than I have to after going through all the pros and cons. I weighed up all the options, found a good deal that ticked all the boxes, and yes, got a great price. I personally really enjoyed the process. I loved booking a trip months ahead of the big day, knowing that I've done all the research and found a good deal. A lot of this comes back to that last episode I released, The Simple Life. Our family doesn't need a 5-star holiday. We love a simple, lazy holiday, and even if money wasn't a consideration, we likely would have booked the same holiday regardless. Overall, the big problem with Ramit's advice is that he fails to understand that not all of us want to have to work forever. Time and financial freedom is a big goal that is worth working towards. By building a low-cost, simple life, we allow ourselves to be content and happy with the simple things. Of course, having the odd holiday and splashing additional money on experiences and creating memory dividends is a great thing. but I know the best thing that I can do for my family is be available to them, and the best way I can do that is work towards a life that doesn't revolve around work. What about those last questions then? What's the rush, and why not find a job you love? In relation to speed and how fast one works to fire, that's always going to be a personal decision. In 2022, I went full throttle, working long days to try and maximize our speed to FI. This was ultimately too much, and I've recently cut back, reducing our monthly savings from around 10,000 euros per month at our peak to 5,000 euros per month today. So my answer to that question is, we've already slowed down. We're already going at a pace that is comfortable for us. Yes, it isn't semi-retirement yet, but it's a balance between the two, and obviously the big push is to still hit that FI number and semi-retire. What about then finding work you love? Well, the truth is, I have in recent years found work I love, but the issue is still there. 40 hours a week is too much to live a life of balance, contentment, and freedom. 40 hours per week doesn't allow me to live the life I wish for, a life where there is enough time in the day to enjoy everything I want, from spending time with family, to exercise, to seeing friends, and voluntary commitments, and everything else in between, such as simply relaxing. The work itself isn't the issue. For the most part, I love work, but the feeling of I could be doing something better with my time is really the bigger issue. Could I cut down to part-time today and embrace the concept? Of course, but I'm still missing one vital thing from our FI portfolio: cash flow. This is the reason why we're still pushing hard and plan to until roughly the end of 2025. We need to pay down our mortgages to free up the cash flow we need from our portfolio. Our plan initially is to live off the rental income, allowing our portfolio to grow in the background while living off the rental income and supplementing any other income through 5 to 10 hours of freelance work per week. Ironically, I can still hear Ramit in the background. What about the capital? You're spending the cash flow, but the portfolio will grow. Absolutely, there is truth in this. But again, study enough about long-term retirement success, and studies show that the first 10 years of one's retirement is the most important in determining if one will outlive their portfolio. For me, the best way we can set ourselves up for success is to make that slower adjustment. Move from full-time work to casual or part-time work initially, let that sink in a little, and transition from there to full-time retirement. Allow the portfolio to breathe a little, a couple of good years, and yes, we can pull the plug to full-time retirement sooner, but don't be afraid to give ourselves that time. My last point, those $5 coffees. Ramit loves to say that they don't make a difference long term. I really disagree. I've always been a big fan of a calculator that Mr. Money Mustache does. Take the expense, work out how much it's costing per year, and multiply it by 10, assuming that money was invested rather than spent, and assuming a 7.2 compounded return over a 10-year period. Then double that again to work out the real cost of the expense. In that case, that $5 coffee that gets purchased 20 days per month is really costing $24,000 over a 10-year period. So there you have it, Ramit. As much as I think your advice is good overall, there surely needs to be an element of balance in there. One needs to factor in time freedom, which should be considered something worth pursuing. Contentment and understanding that simply throwing additional money at something doesn't make it better. And finally, understanding that letting cost and value be part of the equation is always going to be an important factor. As always, guys, if you have any questions on this episode, drop me an email at michael@firepodcast.ie, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode.